So Beltane is one of what we call the cross-quarter days. So these were the holidays of the 8 holidays. These are the 4 that were probably more important to Celtic peoples, while the solstices and equinoxes were probably more important to Germanic and Nordic peoples, which of course really makes sense if you think about the Nordic peoples being farther north. They're really going to be marking these solar holidays. These cross-quarter days are really more lunar, actually. So we already had, with this Scorpio full moon earlier in the week, we had lunar Beltane. And then there's calendar Beltane, which really starts tomorrow evening, which is April 30th, and we call that May Eve. And as I mentioned earlier, this is across the wheel from Samhain, and these are the 2 points that the Celts believed that the veil was thinnest, the veil between the worlds. So the door to the other world is beginning to open. Maybe we feel like it's opened with the full moon and it's getting more and more wide open. And then tomorrow is the night that this energy should be most palpable. So if the weather is a little bit better, it's rainy today, but I'm going to go a creepin'. A Maying, they used to call it. We'll learn about that. And I'm going to try to connect with the Fae folk, the good ones, not the mischievous ones that might steal your babies and make them into changelings. Okay, so Beltane, to the Celtic people, I learned this is interesting. They probably really only thought about 2 seasons, summer and winter. And so this is actually the beginning of summer, just as Samhain was the beginning of winter to them. And what I learned kind of makes sense because the Celts, for the most part, were herding people rather than like really agricultural civilizations. That like the like nuance of the 4 seasons was not as relevant to them. So what it is that Beltane is when the cattle are brought from their winter pastures and from the barns, brought back out into the mountains, into the summer pastures. And then Samhain is the opposite. So this is really a very cattle, livestock focused festival in the Celtic world. We're going to talk about the Maypole, which is more from the Germanic world. But in the Celtic world, where we get the word Beltane, this is really like it's like a cattle festival kind of. And at Samhain, I believe they would sacrifice a cow. And now at Beltane, a lot of it has to do with, again, bringing the cattle out to their summer pastures and purifying them and purifying away all of the disease from the winter, which of course in some years could have been totally disastrous for the community. Like if they lost a lot of the herd, this holiday could be the end of a really difficult period for these herding people. So the word Beltane comes, we think, from the Old Irish, and it means bright fire. So this is a big bonfire holiday. And this is the ritual purification. So they would take the brush from the summer pastures, make a bonfire, and then they drive the cattle through the smoke from the fire. And this is thought to be, maybe physically, but also ritually purifying with getting rid of disease and ensuring fertility. Sometimes they would have 2 fires. And there's actually a phrase in Gaelic, which is getting caught between 2 Beltane fires. And it means like a rock in a hard place. And so I thought that was kind of cool. These bonfires, superstition said that this ritual purification could only work if every single hearth fire in the community was extinguished first. So the whole community has to go completely dark. And then this bonfire is started by friction, not by taking fire from another place or even by flint, but the friction of like 2 sticks together or rope. And they called it a need fire or a needs fire. And there's actually a legend that there was one need fire for all of Ireland, and that the High King would light this fire, and a representative from all over Ireland would come on Beltane with a torch and take a flame from the need fire to bring back to his own bonfire, that then all of the people in his village would come and light their hearth fires from that place. Another legend says that it was more like the High King started the first one, and then people climbed the holy hill in their community from which they could see his fire. And when they saw it, that was the signal. So either way, you know, the symbolism of this, I think, is pretty apparent, of the community coming together, using fire as a ritual to ensure the health of the herd, and the health of the village, the people themselves, and also the fertility of the crops, because of course they did have some crops, even though they were herding people. And this holiday is also all about human fertility and conception. So there was a tradition that they called jumping the fire, where people would literally jump over the bonfire, or at least roll in the smoke, for a number of different reasons. And the big one was if you wanted to find a lover, or get married, or conceive a child in the coming year. Any of those things were reasons why you would jump the fire. And there's evidence that they would actually take the ashes from this bonfire, rub it on themselves, maybe put it in a little pouch like I have here, wear it on their bodies to bring in this fertility and this abundant energy, and also maybe use it as fertilizer, which I think a lot of ash, depending on the tree maybe, but I think ash is natural fertilizer. So they were onto something. So it's all about fertility, and it's like health of the body. It's about new life. But what I learned that I thought was cool was that it's really about life returning to the natural world and the wild world. It's not so much about like tending seeds in furrowed fields, although of course you're doing that at this time of year. This is like, it's Taurus season, right? So we're plowing the fields. But really this is a holiday, at least in the Celtic world, of the forest. So this is about flowering trees, leaves and flowers bursting open, herbs becoming abundant in the forest and being gathered at this time for food and for medicine, and then wild game, because at this point, even hibernating animals are done and they're out and about. And so it's this really kind of lush and very lusty kind of like wild celebration. And again, the veil is really thin. So the Fae folk are about, there's just a lot of like opportunity to kind of make contact with the wild world and the unseen world. And let's see, in the Germanic world, this is known, May 1st is known as Walpurgisnacht, which is ostensibly a Christian holiday of like Saint Walpurg or something, but really it's actually associated with witches riding their broomsticks around and meeting on mountaintops. So this Beltane actually in Germany looks a lot like Halloween. So there's kind of that like spooky, kind of like mischievous feeling. And so throughout Europe, there's really this tradition of, again, young lovers trying to find, you know, a date, maybe not a mate, but maybe just a date for April 30th. So that's tomorrow night. It's a Friday. And so there's this tradition they called it going a maying. Going maying was this idea that two lovers would tell their families, oh, we're going to go to the forest and collect hawthorn branches. Hawthorns are flowering at this time. They're actually sacred to the Fae. They're considered fairy trees. You can't cut one down in Ireland, like still to this day, I think. In a lot of places, you can't cut from a hawthorn tree except for on May Eve. And they would do this to bring in their decor for the festival the next day. So these young people would say, oh, we're gonna go collect some hawthorn for tomorrow's festivities. And then they go into the woods and they have sex, right? And if you do that and you become pregnant at this time, your baby is going to be born around Imbolc in February. And if you remember, Imbolc, we think, means literally in the belly. And it's that feeling of quickening, right? And something being born, the new springtime being born. So I just thought that was pretty cool to think about. One of the most popular things that I hadn't heard of before is this idea of the May dew. The herbs that you collect under the May dew on May 1st are the most potent. It's the most potent day to collect herbs. They're the most magical. And then the dew itself, women and men, but probably mostly women, would actually go out and rub their faces with it, roll in it naked, or even I read, take a silver spoon and scoop it into a bottle because it was believed that this dew would make you beautiful, would make you more beautiful and make you more attractive to find a partner. So these young people are rolling in the dew and they're collecting boughs of flowers, and it's a tradition to create a May bush from a flowering bough. You decorate it with ribbons. You might even write wishes or petitions on them. You might decorate it with eggshells, and then this would be displayed by the front door. And it might be burned in the bonfire that night, or it might be kept throughout the season. And in the Germanic world, this May bush custom, this is probably where the Maypole custom comes from. And it was probably some sort of ritual actually around a living tree, like a fruit tree, to ensure a bountiful yield. And so this was in the Germanic world, and then it made its way to England. And by the time it gets to England, at some point, it becomes this maypole. So this is like a cut pole that is erected in, and I'd use the word erected on purpose, in the village square or in a nearby field. And this is pretty much explicitly a phallic symbol. So don't feel like your mind is in the gutter if that's what you're thinking. It pretty much is a phallic symbol. And there's these ribbons that come down, and there's this dance that maybe is recent from the 19th century, but there's this intricate dance as they weave and braid the ribbons around the pole. And this, some people think that this is like the vaginal symbol, that this is, or like the womb, that these ribbons are the flowers of the earth. And as they wrap the pole, this pole is being wrapped in the womb of the earth itself. So this is just more evidence of just how like lusty this Beltane holiday is. And it's really so explicit that the Puritans actually outlawed the maypole and other parts of May Day. They were just like, no, this is this is sinful. So there really is a lot of evidence that suggests that there was like free license for promiscuity, like real free love on this day, and particularly on May Eve. In England, they had a ceremonial ritual version of this in which they would crown a May Queen and a May King, and they would be married in a marriage ceremony, a ritual performance of this coming together. And all of these traditions, the really sexy ones and the more ritual ones, are mirroring what's happening in the natural world, where what's happening is the sun god has fully returned and is maturing and is now making love to the earth goddess. So she has returned. She gave birth to the sun at the winter solstice and came from her, that mother aspect, and returned into the maiden aspect as Persephone, coming from the underworld at the spring equinox and now moving towards full maturity, meeting with the sun god in a sacred union. So this is the time of year when we say that the green man is returning to the world. So if you spend some time researching this archetype of the green man, I think you'll find that it's maybe like one of the oldest, deepest archetypes that many, many cultures across the world share. And you've actually seen him before. If you've ever seen one of those stone carvings that people have in their gardens, that's like a man's face made out of leaves or covered in leaves, this is the green man. So you see this image all over Europe, and again, all over the world. And this idea, this archetype of the green man has like all these different iterations in our culture. Some of them are like the wild man archetype, like a Tarzan or even a Bigfoot. And then some of them are more like the Jack in the Green archetype. And this is like Robin Hood and Peter Pan and some of these like forest sprite, not a sprite, but it's like Pan. It's like the Greek god Pan, showing up as different like masculine male archetypes. So the green man, it's related to the horned god or the horned one. This is a really primordial archetype of the father god, of the male god. The most famous horned god is Pan from Greece. In Ireland, the Irish version of Pan is Cernunnos. So even the simple image of just a stag comes to mind, the antlers, like the animal god, the animal bridegroom that is the masculine part of the soul, the animus, meeting with the goddess, the anima, the feminine part of the soul, in a sacred union, in an alchemical marriage. This is what we're celebrating on Beltane. This is like the love chase, this love hunt, this lusty, lush union that happens in the forest. And it's it's happening inside each one of us as we feel this fertile, blossoming energy as May approaches. Our inner feminine and our inner masculine are coming together to create this sacred third, this divine child, this child of promise of what could come, that seed that's starting to crack open and to be something, even if you don't know what it is yet. It's an integration of dualities. It's not about male and female. It's about yin and yang. It's about the active principle, the yang principle, and the receptive principle, the yin principle, coming together and reminding us, showing us, and helping us to remember that underneath this duality, this binary that we see all over the place, underneath that is a oneness. It's this one energy that's churning underneath everything. And it's a co-creative energy. We are of it. We're not separate from it. And that's really what Beltane is, an opportunity. It's an opportunity to remember our own co-creative power here as divine humans living on Earth, a bridge between the Earth and the cosmos. That's really what Beltane is about, waking up to that, feeling those energies converging within you and waking up to the one.